Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thought Leadership webinar on transforming education in Africa, Voices of Leaders. My name is Foli Batibo, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this first webinar of the series on transforming education in Africa, organized by the African Union Commission's Department of Science, Technology and Innovation and UNICEF. Our heartfelt thanks to all those who've made this special event possible. For those who need it, interpretation is available in French, Arabic, and Portuguese. Just click on the icon on the bottom right of your screen and choose your language. Now, in the lead up to the African Union's much anticipated Year of Education in 2024, the African Union Commission and UNICEF are bringing together a group of visionary global thought leaders and experts to share their knowledge and foresight on how education can be transformed in Africa in the 21st century. During last year's Transforming Education Summit at the UN's General Assembly, it was highlighted that transforming education requires transformative solutions. But what revolutionary and innovative solutions are feasible for the African context? And what are the pathways? There's no one-size-fits-all solution to the education challenges faced by African countries. So it's incredibly important to hear from a diverse group of voices to understand which ideas work and which ones do not. So over the next hour and a half, and in the course of next year, in the course of 2024, we'll hear from government officials, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, civil society, and youth leaders about concrete actions that can be taken to transform education systems across the African continent. As the saying goes, it takes a village. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Professor Mohamed Belhussein, the African Union's Commissioner in charge of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, to open our session. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. The UNICEF Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Kitty van der Heijden, I hope I'm pronouncing it well. Honorable ministers present, honorable panelists, distinguished participants, wherever you are, greetings from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, from the headquarters of the African Union Commission. On the 15th of November, Catherine Roussel, the executive director of UNICEF, visited Gaza Strip. She declared, I quote, "What I saw and heard was devastating. They have endured repeated bombardment, loss and displacement. Inside the strip, there is nowhere safe for Gaza's 1 million children to turn." End of quote. Since then, the situation have even worsened. I would like to suggest that we all spare a thought for the suffering children and people of Gaza. Thank you. Chair, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this first edition of Thought Leadership webinar series on transforming education in Africa, jointly organized, as was said before, with UNICEF. This is a precursor to the upcoming launch and implementation of the AU Theme of the Year in 2024. We all agree that the landscape of education is constantly evolving, driven by technological advancements, changing societal needs, and the ever-growing aspirations of our learners. However, there is also consensus that progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 4, particularly for Africa, is seriously off track. Lack of investment, high learning poverty rates, a huge deficit of teachers, poor qualification of teachers, and low valuation of their profession, lack of adequate infrastructure, impact of digital divide are some of the challenges our continent faces. It is therefore imperative that we rethink education and training systems and explore the transformative power of thought leadership in shaping the educational landscape of Africa. It is heartwarming to see that at global levels, the need to address some of these issues in a holistic manner is gaining momentum. For instance, the recent development of a joint ILO-UNESCO paper on the teacher's profession is an important milestone in the attempts to rehabilitate a profession without which no progress could be foreseen in the future. Likewise, there is consensus that more funds are needed globally to rescue education systems, particularly in Africa. The idea of having a fund similar to what was done for AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, i.e. the Global Fund, which brought financial resources to countries fulfilling specific criteria, is also gaining momentum. The AU, being now a member of the G20, could add its voice to other voices to advocate for such development to happen sooner than later. Through the webinar series, we aim at gathering expert knowledge and foresight on how education can be transformed in Africa in the 21st century. Reflect on groundbreaking innovative solutions and radical shifts in education that are needed and that would be feasible in and for the African context, and taking into account the global evolutions in education, some of which I have just mentioned. We want to share the experience and expertise on policy, program responses required to transform education and learning on the continent. We must get our education and training systems back on track because education and skills development are so fundamental to unlocking Africa's potential. It is the foundation for economic growth, social development, and peace. As a basic human right, ensuring its accessibility, quality, relevance, adequate financing, and good governance must be our collective responsibility. It is about creating a world where education is not just a privilege for a few, but a right for all. Through this webinar series, we aspire to shape the future of education by generating and sharing innovative ideas, research and insights, ignite conversations, spark debates, and inspire action towards the transformation of education in Africa. By dedicating 2024 to education, the AU is acknowledging that a new and fresh impetus and pivot is necessary if we are to have effective, long-lasting, system-wide transformation of education and skills development in our continent. A major challenge, particularly for Africa, is the youth bulge and unemployment. Yet there is also a surge in demand for new and emerging skills that young people should be empowered to tap into. The challenges before us are significant, but the opportunities, especially with the AU theme of the year on educating and skilling Africa for the 21st century, are even greater. I want to thank our speakers for their commitment to this cause. I thank all partners and stakeholders who worked hand in hand with us during this year to design a roadmap of key activities to focus on during this year 2024. And I thank UNICEF, of course, for being one of them and for already engaging us in concrete action through this series of webinars. We need a shared vision for a brighter future of education and a clear pathway so that every child, regardless of background or circumstances, has the opportunity to reach their full potential and become the architects for a more just and equitable world. As we delve into innovative ideas and strategic insights, let us envision a future where education becomes a catalyst for progress, empowerment, and sustainable development across the continent. Once again, welcome all to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Bellocine. As you said, it's about creating a world where education is a right for all. Thank you for your opening remarks, which highlighted the objectives of this webinar and what we can expect to come out of it. And now I would like to invite the Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Kitty van Heijden, to deliver her statement. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you also, Your Excellency, for your opening remarks and for the opportunity for us at UNICEF to join this important discussion. And a heartfelt thanks also to all the esteemed participants and panelists for your participation, and of course for the audience for being with us, because this will only work if all of us come together. And I'm really delighted to be here to set this momentum towards the AU Year of Education in 2024. And I understand that's the first time in its history. And of course that matters, because there can be no child rights that are realized if we do not educate our children. And nowhere in the world are children more central to a continent's future than in Africa. By the middle of the century, Africa will be home to almost 1 billion children under the age of 18. And Your Excellency, you mentioned this, the youth bulge is huge. Now, for some people, when they talk about this, it is a scary thing. To me, to us in UNICEF, we see this as a fantastic opportunity. 1 billion brilliant brains. What if we were to educate all of them and they can shape the future of the planet, the future of all of us? And as the 22nd century dawns, when there will be more children in Africa than anywhere else in the globe, will we allow the children of Africa to rise to the occasion? Now, across the continent, we hear so many stories of innovation, of human resilience, of development success that hold profound lessons for all of us. And UNICEF, as the UN agency, is of course mandated to advocate for children's rights. We're firmly aware that the progress of Africa's children and of Africa's young people is progress for entire communities, is progress for countries in Africa, but is progress for our collective well-being, is progress for the world at large. And of course, that progress is also a right in itself, enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And it's our joint aspirations with the AU Commission as we accelerate progress towards Agenda 2030 and the AU's Agenda 2063. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves right now is, how can we see in Africa, like 20, 30 years from now, where every child and every young person is able to realize its full potential? Now, we at UNICEF really believe that that aspirational goal can become a reality, despite all the challenges, if we are to invest in concrete actions now. And obviously, one such a concrete action is, as His Excellency has already said, investing in quality education and learning and access to that education for everyone. It is one of the most powerful instruments for change. And the simple act of just going to school will impact generations and entire communities. It drives equity, it reduces poverty, it cultivates social cohesion, and it can be transformative for an entire society. So providing every child with quality education, with the skills needed to participate in society, that would boost GDP on average by 28% per year in lower income countries. 28% per year. Now, if I were to be an investor, I would put all my money into that, because that's one of the greatest return on investment you can get. Now, we know that national governments in Africa have really already made substantial progress in recent decades in getting more children into school. But I think we all realize, as the number of young children is growing, the time has come really for all of us to do more. That's why this AU Year of Education, transforming education, matters so much to all of us. And I think one thing we need to do is, from setting realistic country targets on pre-primary education and foundational learning in primary education, to really make education also a priority in government budgets, whilst knowing, of course, that the increasing debt burden is going to make that increasingly difficult. So how do we actually do that? That we also need to invest in youth skilling, in innovative sort of learning to earning pathways for Africa's growing young population, because the labor market will look very different from when I left secondary school. They need digital skills, they need green skills, they need to be part of the solution as the world is changing towards a greener future. And thank God that in COP, we have taken some progressive decisions towards phasing out fossil fuels and reducing the existential threat that climate change brings to the children of Africa. So from UNICEF, let me just say that we think that acceleration is possible if we seize the moment right now. And we are committed to work with Africa, with the African Union, to realize that just think for one moment, if we let our imagination run free, if we were to educate just 1 billion brilliant brains in Africa, the energy and the innovation that that would unleash for communities, for countries, and for our collective well-being in the world. That is our dream, that is our commitment. And as UNICEF, we will be a steadfast partner in making that vision a reality. And I look forward to a fantastic debate with all of the esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for doing this together with UNICEF, the UN Agency for Children's Rights. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Kitty van der Heijden, for that powerful opening statement there. As you said, this will only work if we can all work together. Thank you to UNICEF for its invaluable partnership in this initiative. And you've perfectly set the stage for our panel discussion, which will focus on some of the groundbreaking solutions to transform education on the African continent. To our online audience joining us from around the world, a reminder that translation is available should you need it. It's available in French, Arabic, and Portuguese. Just click on the globe icon on the bottom right of your screen and choose your language. Now, let me introduce you our distinguished panelists for this first webinar of the season. So, joining us is Her Excellency Salima Ba, Minister of Communication, Technology, and Innovation of Sierra Leone. Also with us, Her Excellency Aoud Deng Acho, Minister for General Education and Instruction of South Sudan, and Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, founder and CEO of Human Capital Africa and a former Minister of Education for Nigeria. Our thanks to all of our distinguished panelists for joining us. Thank you so much for your time, which we appreciate. I'll put my first question to Minister Salima Ba of Sierra Leone. Thank you for joining us once again. As we know, Minister, the transformation of education in Africa requires groundbreaking solutions and strategic shifts for the continent to catch up to the 21st century. And this shift can be guided by the vision of what Africa would look like, say, in 40 or 50 years, if governments were to commit and adopt to a few big ideas in education. So, Minister Ba, if you can share with us from your experience in Sierra Leone some key ideas of innovative solutions for the African context, what is their potential to accelerate transformation in education, and what are the possible challenges that we should be considering in turning them into reality?
Thank you so much, moderator, for that question. And I want to thank and say hello to your excellencies, all present, ministers, as well as thanking the African Union and UNICEF for putting together this such a key conversation, I think, that needs to be had. I think in order to answer your question, I think for us, in terms of what Sierra Leone has been able to do within the past 5 years with the new administration of His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio, I think one of the key things in terms of improving education is making it a priority. Making it an absolute priority, and not just making it priority as in words, as in lip service, but making it priority and let that be reflected in your policies and in what your country invests in. So taking Sierra Leone as an example, during the first term of His Excellency the President, Human Capital Development Agenda, education was the flagship of that agenda. And that was reflected in terms of the policies that we did and the financing. 22% of the budget of the government of Sierra Leone was allocated towards education. So that really set the tone in terms of sending out the clear message that education was our priority. And it was for all the reasons I believe the representative from UNICEF just mentioned, in terms of we understand the potential economic impact that it could have towards our country And also understanding that education and being able to invest in the young people is the absolute priority, and is what is going to basically leverage leverage us, leverage our position, and be able to put us to where we need to be. So that was key for us. But I think another aspect that was really key for us is in terms of moving from policy to a legally enforceable instrument, you know, because I think saying that because we started off as a policy of radical inclusion, free quality school education, all of those were policies. But in order to ensure that they were long-lasting and effective, we had to move them from policy to legislation. So in terms of our radical inclusion policy, the government was really invested in ensuring that the marginalized, the ones that were discriminated against, we really brought them into the formal education sector. And sometimes we had to take a really strong and have those strong and difficult conversations. Not sure if you're aware of, in Sierra Leone before this, we had a policy of pregnant girls could not attend school, could not be admitted to the formal education. And this was one of the really hard policy decisions that we had to turn around and put it into legal effect when we lifted that ban on pregnant girls being admitted and allowed into the classroom. There were others such as looking at our curriculum and what was mentioned in terms of being able to really, really take a hard look at the curriculum and see whether this really was preparing students for the future economy. I think when we took a look, we realized, you know, we had some in terms of what the curriculum was, it really wasn't preparing our children for that. So that's another thing which we had to do, and being able to deliver on that. Also, free basic education, making education free to a certain level. That was a policy that eventually moved to legislation, to the point where in Sierra Leone right now, it is actually illegal for students to pay for education, and up to secondary school education. But actually, and we even went further, for girls in STEM programs, we made it free up to university level. So these are some of the policy changes that we had to do. Another one was school feeding. We saw for students to be able to access, you know, meals, because we understand the impact that has in less privileged communities in terms of being able to access that one meal a day. So we actually made our school feeding program as part of our legally enforceable regulatory framework. So all of these are policies that we had to move to legislation. I think has really really been key in terms of, if we really look at the impacts those has, because I think sometimes it's easy to just you know, check off these things that we're able to do. But I think the devil is in looking at what the results are and what has this been able to deliver for us. And we kind of see that in the data, in terms of the fact that we have been able to improve service conditions and salaries for basic and senior secondary teachers. Over the past 5 years, we have been able to have increments for 3 years. We have been able to go from 10% to 30% and to 45% within the space of 5 years. Also, we have been able to increase wages for tertiary education teachers by 75% over that period of time. Also, in terms of looking at what have been the learnings, in terms of improved learnings, we have been able to have over 1 million new learnings, representing 35% increase between 2018 and 2022. And also, most importantly, we look at our pass rates, which is where I think that is the ultimate ultimate indicator of whether your policies have been able to be effective. We've seen an increase in our pass rates on public exams, but has jumped by 55% which was at 55% in 2018 to 2022. Now we're at 77%. So those have been really key indicators for us. But then I think outside of that, we've also been able to introduce tech and innovation as key enablers in order to drive our education agenda. Through that, we've been able to introduce key systems and solutions to enable us, for example, enable decision-making. For example, one of the things we're able to do is actually supported by UNICEF. We've been able to geolocate all of the schools across the country because that was a problem that we were facing before. And added to that data, we'll be able to know what resources are available in these different schools and being able to see how the availability of resources, how that impacts the education outcomes. And these are really key for us. And then in terms of making the decisions in terms of where do we allocate resources, where resources are needed, and really how that we could determine how that could potentially impact learnings. And also we've been able to use technology to really reduce the financial burden on our parents and our guardians. For example, before in Sierra Leone, for students and parents to access the results for public examinations, they had to pay a certain fee and had to go through this very long and arduous process. But we were able to leverage USSD to be able to put these results online, and children and students and parents now able to access results free of charge. And I think up to date, we've calculated that that has saved over $2 million in fees that they were paying before. And that is a huge, that has had a really huge impact in terms of, supporting less privileged communities and be able to access those. Also, we're looking at also leveraging tools such as the Learning Passport, which we also supported by UNICEF on, being able to digitize our curriculum and have it available on the Learning Passport, which has offline opportunities as well. It has been really key for us. Even other things such as past paper questions in Sierra Leone. Before, there was such a difficult, anybody who went to school within our regions understood the difficulty there was in terms of being able to access past paper questions. We've been able to digitize that and have that on the Learning Passport where students are able to use it as part of their practice. And we have seen the impact it has had on exam preparation and the results students get. So all of those have been really key to us. But also in terms of innovation, one of the things we also introduced was results-based financing. I think being within the African region, we sometimes get these difficulties of where contracts are given to service providers in order to improve, and sometimes with little or no impact we've seen. So one of the things which we did actually with the Education Outcomes Fund was introduce this concept of results-based financing. We identified a problem around improving the literacy and numeracy rates in primary school education. And we introduced this project where service providers were invited to prefer solutions to those. And they were only paid based off the outcomes of their solution. So for us, that has been actually, and it started off as a $5 million project, but eventually based off the success that it had, we've been able to upscale it to a $30 million project. So those have been really, really key for us as well. And I think other things such as increasing infrastructure, right? When we talk about preparing children for the future world and looking at how digital solutions can impact that. So we can do none of that without connectivity. We all know, looking at the digital divide and how we're able to bridge that and ensuring that our students have access to the wealth of information that is available online and opportunities that are available online. Looking at the GIGA project, this is an ITU UNICEF project that we've been able to roll out, and the goal is really to connect every school in Sierra Leone to the internet, and we're well on our way in order to be able to do that as well. So all of these have been really key. But I think just in summary and conclusion, I would say key to all of this, I would advise in terms of for Africa to be able to get there, is leaders have to be willing and open to change. I think because most of these policies and regulations that we were able to do within these 5 years really took bravery and being able to try new innovative things. I think we took the approach of what we had been doing hadn't worked so far. So we were going to try something different and being brave enough to be able to do that. So underlining advice would be Africa as a whole and thought leaders have to be open to change and open to trying new innovative solutions to really get the impacts that we want.
Minister Bah, thank you so much. Thank you for those innovative ideas and solutions to help accelerate education transformation on the African continent. And as you said, leaders have to be willing and open to change. And another important point you've made, and I think we'll discuss later with the other panelists, is that in order to ensure that the policies are long-lasting and effective, they have to be turned into legislation, right? So thank you very much for highlighting those points to us. And now I'd like to turn to Her Excellency Awut Deng Acho, Minister for Education, General Education and Instruction in South Sudan. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us. As we know, the promise of education will only be realized if every child, no matter where they are from, get quality education. And your government's efforts in promoting equity in education, especially for girls and marginalized children, I think holds lessons for all of us. So can you share with us, Minister Acho, the actions that South Sudan has taken to make inclusive education a reality, including mobilizing resources in really what is a resource scarce environment? What have you done? Tell us about your experience in South Sudan.
Thank you very much for the great question. First, I wanted to thank African Union and UNICEF for organizing things and bringing us together to share our experiences. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am delighted to participate in this important webinar to share with you South Sudan Transformative Education Initiative. My government is making a number of initiatives to transform education in the country. One, legal and policy framework. First and foremost, the education system in South Sudan is guided by series of laws and policies document, namely the Transitional Constitution, the General Education Act 2012, and the General Education Strategic Plan, which is costed to make things different. This framework document enshrine the right to education for all children without discrimination. Education is a fundamental human right, so therefore it is compulsory and free. To underscore this point, in February 2023, the President of the Republic of South Sudan issued an order declaring free and compulsory education for all, public school from pre-primary to secondary school, as a right of every child, especially the most disadvantaged ones, and we aspire to ensure that all children receive quality education. It was to allow the 2.8 million that was out of school to go to school. Secondly, transform education, you must improve domestic budget, education budget. Is key for us to change things. So budget allocation to education has shown a steady increase from 5% in 2019 to 2020 to almost now 13% in 2023 and 2022, 2023. In fact, the government of South Sudan during the Transforming Education Summit committed itself to increase its education budget to 20% by 2030. Also, what we have looked at, teachers play a central part in transforming education. So the ministry prioritized investment in teachers and in strengthening teacher management, recruitment, deployment, and professional development and their payroll. To improve the equity and quality as well as retention of teaching workforce with a special focus on female teachers, which creates an enabling environment for girls' education and well-being. Moreover, there has been a flow of funds to school, PAYAMs, counties, and state, as well as endeavor to improve equity, efficiency, accountability in the education sector. The recent adoption of a new teacher salary structure of 400% constitute a significant positive step towards improvement of teachers' working condition, retention, and attracting teachers back to classroom. Furthermore, to transform education, we must attend to equity and inclusive issues. South Sudan has also established a national education strategies for creating a conducive and safe environment for girls' education and children with disability. We have also developed policies such as female teachers affirmative action to bring the female workforce into the education sector. The government also, the ministry in particular, has been conducting education conferences with the community leaders to emphasize that the importance of girl education. This has led to expansion in community girls' schools, especially in areas with the pronounced social and cultural barriers to girl education. These are our examples enhancing equity in education. The total student enrollment in the country reached over 2.3 million in 2021 from 1.2 million in 2015, from which 86% are in primary education. And I can say that after the announcement of the president, in some of our states, 51% are girls right now in primary school. Girls are progressively catching up at primary level, and there has been a remarkable increase in enrollment of girls in our education system. School, between 2028, we had 46%, and now 2021, we have 49%, representing 3% increment. We also observe an improvement in girl performance in both primary and secondary education examination from 2018 to 2021. Girl taking the lead in our country. Finally, quality education, improving teaching and learning. The new national competency-based curriculum that has a clear vision and curriculum objective was developed and rolled out. Coming from the war, we had different curriculum that were being implemented, but now we are implementing our national curriculum. However, with all that achievement, a full implementation of the national curriculum has been constrained by severe limitation on availability of sufficient and qualified teachers. South Sudan is having shortage of mathematics, science, and English teachers. Teaching and learning resources from the traditional teaching of guiding the children as a teacher to be a facilitator is another challenge for our teachers. So, and then the status of the school environment to support the implementation of TEiA curriculum, the infrastructure issues, a country that has come from the war, the few schools which were destroyed. So has also, some of our schools are under trees. So it has not been easy for us to do the complete implementation. The ministry and its partners, UNICEF and many other partners in education, they are making concerted effort on enhancing equity in education, as well as strengthening teaching and learning to improve the learning outcome for all children in South Sudan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Minister Acho, for sharing with us your government's efforts to promote equity in education and the tools and methods South Sudan is using to transform education. And congratulations to you and your ministry for the remarkable increase in girls' enrollment. Thank you very much, Minister. I'd now like to come to you, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. You were Minister of Education in an African country which has one of the largest youth populations today. And the African continent, as you know, will be home to 1 billion people, 1 billion children, I should say, by the year 2055. And recently, we've heard African leaders commit to invest in education to develop human capital that will unlock Africa's full potential. Can you share with us, Dr. Ezekwesili, what concrete actions you think African governments and leaders can take, not in 10, 20 years, but right now, to transform education systems and capitalize on the continent's changing demographics?
Thank you so very much. And I must start by acknowledging Professor Belsen, the Commissioner for the very important topic that we're engaged in today. The reason I congratulate you is that finally the continent is focusing on the most important, the incredibly most important thing that should matter to us. Not natural resources, not any of the things that we seem to sweat over. It is really about our human capital. And so this is a legacy moment for you, Professor, and your team in that particular department of the African Union Commission. This is a legacy moment. And this is a moment that I believe that all of us as partners would have to join hands with you to propel this, not simply as 1 year of focus on education, but an all-time focus on education, on our human capital, as the basis for what you quoted in your speech, to be economic development, to be social progress, and to be stability and peace. I thank you that this opportunity is here for us to start a top leadership process into the conversation for the year ahead. To the specific question that you have asked, I believe that for us, 2050 is now. It's not many years from now. 2050 is now. And so there is an incredible sense of urgency. The fiercest type of urgency must be what drives our focus. And for me, I have a mantra. In God, I trust. Every other person must bring their data. So I trust in God, but every other person that's speaking on any issue must bring their data. And so first thing is, on this matter of education and economic growth, economic development, what do we have? What we see is that the state of education almost mirrors the kind of level of poverty that we continue to have on our continent. By the latest economic update, our continent is home to about 463 million poor people, people who are perniciously poor. Now, according to data, by the year 2030, 90% of the world's extremely poor people will be found only on our continent. So by the time the rest of the world has said goodbye to pernicious poverty, we will still be harboring this large-scale contingency of the poor. Now, to the extent that there's a correlation between education and economic growth and tackling poverty, it means that any other conversation that we are having as a priority now is a big mistake. The key conversation we should be having is education. And yet, not just education in the broad sense of it, but according to evidence, we know that foundational level of education is what sets people ready to engage, because it is what shapes the future success, the future survival of anyone. To that extent, therefore, if we talk about the youthful population by the year 2050, what do we know? We do know that by that time, 1 out of every 3 young people in the workforce of the world would be African. If that is so, it means that our development strategy must bear that in mind. It becomes a matter of how do we leverage this data as a basis to unlock the kind of productivity of workforce that matters to the world by that time. This is the kind of conversation we should get our leaders to embrace. We shouldn't simply talk about the input into education. We should begin to think in terms of what kind of prosperous Africa do we want to see? What kind of productive Africa do we want to see? What do we have in terms of evidence-based policy that lead us in that direction? And that's what takes me to another set of data to show you that 2050 is now, not in many decades from now. It is that by the time you're talking about 2050, the children that we currently have in foundational levels of education would be the ones that have entered the workforce at that time. But guess what data tells us? Data tells us that even though we're doing well with access to education, where we mostly have come to a universalization of access to basic education, but when it comes to whether the children who are in school are learning, we are so way behind the curve. Whereas middle income, low income globally, we are at a level of about 6 out of every 10 not having foundational learning outcomes that are proficient and enabling of them to move to higher levels of learning or to even move to the workforce. In Africa, it is 9 out of every 10. Now, since we know the basic maxim that if the foundation of a house is in trouble, it is pointless to go to the roof and try to put fancy decorations. That therefore means that if we as Africans who have had the privilege of quality education that gave us solid foundation to make the kind of progress that we have made, if we really want to fix the problem of Africa's education, we must be the ones that rally our political and policy leaders to say, year of education, correcting the foundation. Because if we can correct the foundation, we can layer on the knowledge. Because by the way, we normally say that knowledge is fungible. So we can layer on the knowledge of how we have corrected this foundation that's causing the crack at every other level. If we can do that, we will have succeeded in positioning the youthful population that will embrace this new opportunity that our continent will have in terms of global demographic shifts, where we would be the suppliers of the world's workforce. So it is critical for me that we should, Professor Belson and all of us supporting him, should get the year of education to not be just some, spacious conversation about, oh, we all love education, we love education. We're doing something about education. But are we doing something based on informed policy choices that are anchored on evidence? evidence-based ideas of what works and what does not work. So these are my first set of points. Now, another thing that Professor Bellison said, and I listened attentively to him, is that like we have the Global Fund for malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV and AIDS, we should imagine a global fund for education. Not a bad idea. But I think that a corollary to that idea is that if we had a global fund for education, and we are spending in the way that we currently spend in education, it would not give us a good outcome. As Minister of Education, I said to the country that the way that we spend in education has cost us so much in terms of real outcomes in the learning levels of children. And the reason is that we just simply spend on education. We don't entrench the tools of monitoring and evaluation to track progress in order to know in what specific areas do we invest very scarce resources and get the highest payback. So it is important that one of the things people will go away, leaders will go away from the year of education, learning how to do, is to invest efficiently. So even if it is that countries are still at 6% or 10%, we want them to squeeze the best outcome from that investment and then use it as a basis and a case for a real global pursuit of additional investment into education, because that is what will serve our young people for the years that they would govern the labor space globally. Number two, the next point to this is, of course, that when you think in terms of what we're saying, the role of the teacher in the classroom, you know, we're not going to fix education by the meetings we would have in the year of education. It will be fixed by virtue of what's happening in the classroom, right there where the teachers are with the children. And so I loved when dear Cathy from the DED for UNICEF talked about the one number of teachers and the quality of teachers. But even beyond that, it is the coaching, it is the empowering, it is the methods of teaching. These issues that matter in order to remove the kind of asymmetry we currently have in terms of the capacity of our children to learn. And so I believe that the key thing for the younger ones, the people we care about, would be the focus on the teachers as the primary drivers of the kind of shift we want to have. But just giving that to the teachers is not enough. Because in the year 2050, it's an entirely different economic structure that they are entering into. So if they are entering into a new economic structure, and the scientist that is Professor Bellison knows this more than I do, it means that we have to reflect that in the content of learning that we are serving them. And so the kind of curriculum changes that we have to see on the continent at the different levels of learning is so much at the heart of what are the children really learning. But whatever they learn, remember that it must be built on the basic science of learning, where they have foundational skills, whether it is in terms of the capacity to number things, it's in capacity with simple mathematical operations for their ages, and then for them to be able to read with comprehension. Whatever they are learning has to be connected to that. But then the content of what they learn ahead for when they would drive the global workforce is really important for us. You could get me talking about education for life, you know, so let me, but I know I have only 7 minutes and I probably have already used it up. So what I would end on is to say to the team, our friends at the AUC, that look, I think you have a lot of people who are really rooting for you for the year of education. A lot will depend on how you can just harvest all the thoughts, all the minds in a coherent way. This must be a shared agenda. We want to be able to make sure that when you are out there speaking on education, we're all just pumped up because we know that the word that you speak will create the impetus for change within countries. I have seen over the course of my life, having been vice president at the World Bank for Africa, dealing with the 48 countries on the continent at that time, I have seen that sometimes regional priority can force domestic prioritization of an issue. You have an incredible opportunity, Mr. Commissioner, to really embed a desire for education at the levels that you want to see in each of the countries by virtue of the way this agenda will be drawn in the year 2024, but even beyond it. And I just want to say that all of us are totally ready for the year 2024 for education and will be supporting in as much way as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Obi, for your powerful words, your very informative remarks there on the actions that African leaders and the African Union Commission can take to change and transform the education sector and capitalize on Africa's changing demographics and its changing population, its young population, of course. And we'll note an important point you made, the year 2050 is now, it's happening now. And you insisted, and I found this very interesting, on the fact that the year of education, the 2024 year of education on the African continent should focus on correcting the foundations. So thank you very much, Dr. Obi, for your remarks. Now, I think it's important to note, we've been talking about the changing demographics of the continent and its youth population, of course. So it's important to note that it's also paramount that we listen and understand the needs of young Africans, and this in their own voice as we explore various ideas on this issue. So I'd like to take this moment now to introduce a short video of young Africans sharing their ideas on how we can transform education across the continent. Please take a look.
Hello everyone, this is Isra Boussita from Algeria, North Africa. What if my school gets some funding? How should it be spent? Let's watch the video.
Comment les dépenser? Premièrement, c'est construire des nouveaux locaux pour désengorger les salles de classe qui sont pleines à craquer. Deuxièmement, c'est la procuration des manuels pédagogiques pour les élèves et les enseignants. Troisièmement, c'est acheter des nouveaux bancs pupitres pour les élèves et autres matériels scolaires nécessaires.
Provide more resources that speak on the issues of differences between cultures, races, and disabilities.
C'est dans cette optique que je pense que les écoles devraient prioriser les cours pratiques au détriment des cours théoriques à travers l'élaboration des laboratoires pour les expériences. De plus, les professeurs devraient être mieux aidés et plus formés à rendre leurs cours plus pratiques.
I felt a teacher can make their classes better by being practical. The result of being practical is good memory and productivity. When a teacher teaches his students in a practical term, they tend to remember what is being taught for a very long period of time. And 90% of what is being taught is always remembered.
So the digital skill I would love to learn is search engine marketing. This is because beyond social media, search engine marketing is one of the most influential disciplines that marketers have come to rely on.
Inspiring words, as you heard there, from Africa's youth. Now, let's hear from more young African voices who will be affected by the plans and ideas we're discussing here today and that we'll be discussing throughout the year 2024. How do they see education being transformed on the continent? What ideas and plans do they have, and do they think will work, since they are on the front lines of any change in this regard. So let's start with Idriss Gergiz, who's from Tunisia. Idriss, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. Excellencies, I am Idriss Gergiz from Tunisia, a geopolitics and international relations student, a youth advocate on climate change, and a young researcher on the localized effects of climate change. I just came back from the COP28, where I participated as a party delegate as a part of the official Tunisian delegation. And if there's anything we have retained from this COP as developing countries and as African nations, is that we need to be the ones taking initiative to ensure the prosperity and the rights of the African youth and children in the face of climate change. In the context of Transform Education Africa initiative, we must assure that our curriculums are not only inclusive of the young people and their particularities, but we must also utilize this momentum to make our education based on the climate reality of our time. Climate change is the most fundamental challenge my generation is facing in its presence and in its future. This is a vital issue for the African continent, and our curriculums and education should reflect that. Having subjects such as climate education and manifesting the intersectional reality of climate change and its omnipresence in all of the fields of life is crucial for the awareness of our youth. Most importantly, we must use this momentum that His Excellency Professor Mohammed bin Hussein mentioned to enable our education to create climate-resilient jobs, to assure that the qualifications of our people are in line with the challenges that they will face as a consequence of climate change, to assure that we tackle for good the problem of youth unemployment in Africa and push for innovation, a sustainable creativity wave that will push for African autonomy, energy efficiency, and a just transition towards a friendly green Africa. Our pledges and commitments towards a maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures means that we must invest in human capital, a capital that can push us towards a transition into economies that are sustainable, that are green, and that are climate resilient. Our continent must evolve, must lead, and must survive. Utilizing this transformation to reflect the wants and needs of the people in terms of education can and should be done. Initiatives such as the Istishara, a public consultation on education reform in Tunisia, in the context of this transformation, could be the way forward to assure a just transition and a climate-aware curriculum. Pushes such as this can materialize what we as young people advocate for and want to see reflected in our education. So I would love to hear the opinions and reflections of Your Excellencies on such pushes for reform and the role of climate change in the transformation intended to be undertaken in the education all across Africa. Over to you, Madam Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Idriss. Thank you so much for your recommendations and your remarks. Perhaps we could put your thoughts to Minister Achul from South Sudan. Minister, Idriss made an important point there about the impact of climate change on education. I know you were also at COP28 in Dubai very recently. What do you make of what Idriss said there, and how can we transform education in Africa while taking into account the effects and the impact of climate change on the continent?
Thank you very much for the question. I think I totally agree with what he has just spoken. I was also there. And I think there is a link between climate change and education. In my country, as example, and many countries in Africa, we have seen the pattern of rain, of flood, drought, and this is all affecting education system in Africa. And I can take example of a state I visited 6 weeks ago in my country, where the flood has remained for 4 years. And all our schools submerged in water. Communities displaced, learners displaced, teachers displaced. So it is important that the African Union and African countries link the human capital and climate resilience. Even though I believe that we have not made much contribution into what is happening today, but we are paying the heavy price now. And as a young population, because Africa having the young population that need to be empowered, that need to be skilled, that need to be given the skill to give us solutions to challenges we are facing today, climate change. So I believe together as a family, we must sit to hear the voice of the young people, the young children, the women who are mostly affected when it comes to climate change, where a child is displaced, and that is where they get this forced early marriage. When things become difficult, it puts everybody in poverty, and then the girl child pay a price. So it is important that we bring these powerful voices to bring solution to the problem so that we have a sustainable solution in addressing climate change. So I totally agree with the youth, I totally agree with children, and sure, as a community, we have solutions with all of us, not just leaders. Government can create an enabling environment, but I think it is important that we bring this together and get a sustainable solution.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your remarks and for responding to Idris there. As you say, young people and women are the most impacted by climate change, and it's important that they are part of this conversation that we're having about transforming education on the African continent. Idris, thank you once again for being with us and sharing your ideas with the panel. Now, I'd love to bring in Cynthia Nyongesa from Kenya to share her perspective and ideas with us. Cynthia.
Ladies and gentlemen, in my early years, attending a public primary school meant grappling with the harsh reality of limited access to government-provided textbooks. It is therefore difficult to see how parents and guardians of adolescents and youth from families that are harder to reach can be expected to afford the luxury of an electronic device essential for their connectivity and digital prowess. Recognizing the needs of all stakeholders in the education system is vital. Our learners must be equipped with curricula that fosters digital competencies and acquire skills that align with the demands of the 21st century and the future of work. Teachers, the backbone of our education system, must have equitable access to devices, training, and content that empowers them to impart knowledge. Now, let us confront the stark reality of the digital divide. Africa has one of the broadest digital gender gaps globally. According to the ITU, 35% of men and 24% of women accessed the internet in 2020. This disparity represents a profound injustice. Young girls utilizing technology for learning face the scourge of online violence, which includes bullying and grooming. Additionally, nearly 2 in 5 African primary schools lack essential drinking water, sanitation facilities, adversely impacting girls' welfare, enrollment, and attendance. But it's also important to focus on the solutions. Many articulated by the youth during the Transforming Education Summit in 2022, and which you've already seen in the video. It is time to heed their call and take bold steps to secure a future where education is not just a privilege, but a right for all. Governments, it is time to fortify your legal instruments and guidelines to grapple with online safety issues and digital citizenship. As I conclude, growing up and attending primary and secondary school in Africa was a transformative experience that remarkably shaped my trajectory. While facing the inherent challenges of my environment, pivotal interventions such as the synergy between my school and the local government and strategic partnerships with the private sector, particularly with entities like golf clubs, significantly broadened our horizons as young learners. These collaborations facilitated access to co-curricular activities such as sports and provided essential educational technology equipment. This included cutting-edge IT tools and educational practices geared towards enhancing our proficiency in gaming and typing, paving the way for a holistic educational experience. I am compelled to advocate for replicating such successful partnerships on a broader scale. And now I have a question to Dr. Obi. How can partnerships with the private sector contribute to sustainable financing for education? And are there any successful examples you can highlight, particularly in the context of foundational learning?
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your question to Dr. Obi. I'll come to you in a moment, Dr. Obi, but I wanted to bring in Minister Ba quickly on the issue of connectivity and the digital divide that Cynthia mentioned. Minister Ba of Sierra Leone, your thoughts about what she said and how we can make this digital divide, how we can narrow it on the African continent.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And I think Cynthia's question was absolutely spot on and it's absolutely correct. And I think one thing I mentioned in my initial statement is the issue of the digital divide and seeing how that is going to be impacting our young people, not being able to access information and opportunities that is available online is something we as a government we take as an absolute priority. I think for us, I think we consider access to the internet as a basic human right, because I think before in Africa, in our regions, there was this idea of maybe accessing the internet was seen as a luxury, those that could afford it. But I think for us, we're considering it as something that everybody must have, because even starting from the schools and being able to access those, but even like these communities, the economic impact, being able to access marketplaces, all of these are available with the internet. So we consider that absolute priority. And one of the things that we're looking to do and able to tackle it, as I mentioned before, we're one of the front runners in terms of the GIGA initiative, which is a UNICEF and ITU global program that is looking to connect every school to the internet. And one of the first things we had to do was really understanding where these schools are and what is the possibility of connecting them to the internet, because I think you quickly realize is we have schools in areas that are not easily connectable to the internet. So we had to, first of all, understand what the feasibility for that was. And that's something we've been able to do. Now we're in the process of actually rolling out connections to schools. But I think it's also important to note that connectivity is not just for connectivity's sake. And we're looking at then, I think we need to be discussing meaningful connectivity, right? So beyond the internet connections, we have to start thinking of devices in schools. We have to start thinking of the learning platforms that are going to be used to do that. So whilst the GIGA project, which we have been doing, focuses primarily on the connectivity to schools, as part of that, we have been having conversations of how do we actually roll out devices in schools. So one of the things, and then I think in all of it is such a learning process, right? Because initially there was this idea of every school should have an ICT lab. Obviously, that's the ideal position, but I think you quickly realize the financial implications of that. So we have had to pivot and say, at the very bare minimum, every school should have an ICT lab, which basically has a device and a projector that at least the teachers can use to teach. And there are studies to show that actually devices in the hands of the teachers has way more impacts than maybe in terms of devices in the hands of the students. So for us, those are one of the things that we're looking to have as a part of our strategy in the schools that we are connecting.
So it's not just about connectivity, as you say, but meaningful connectivity. Thank you so much, Minister Ba, for your response. Let me come to you, Dr. Obi, now. And the minister there mentioned the financial implications. And Cynthia's question was, how do we enhance the public-private partnership when talking about transforming education on the African continent? Okay, we seem to have lost our connection with Dr. Obi. Perhaps, Minister Ba, you would like to add a few more thoughts to that, enhancing public-private partnerships?
Sure. And I think specifically, I think for us, financing has been a big aspect in terms of looking at connectivity to schools. And it's actually one of the areas where we're really piloting different innovative financing models in order to be able to do this. Actually, one thing we're actually piloting is looking at cryptocurrency as a means of financing this. But then definitely public-private partnerships with private sector has been key, understanding that governments cannot do this on our own. So we've been really partnering. I think the Obi's are back, so
Dr. Obi is back. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Ba, for that. So, Dr. Obi, yeah, we were talking about the public-private partnership, which the minister was also addressing there. And Cynthia's question from Kenya was, how do you enhance the public-private partnership on the continent?
AU has an opportunity to build out in the year of education. Because what we've seen is that we often think in terms of resources as being money. So the first thing we're all thinking of, how do we get more money? You know, the first thing that we should do is to inverse what we're looking at as resource. My number one resource for the AU during this period and beyond is partnerships. Partnerships is an incredible resource. So it has to do a partnership canvas. It has to map all kinds of possible partners in the private sector, whether it is global or domestic, citizens and communities as part of the partnership map. We need to have a major, like a mega partnership map. Do you know the importance of that? What is important in partnership mapping is that you are saying, who else does it matter to that Africa's education should be 21st century compliant? Any such person should be at the table of a partnership engagement. And one of the things that we found is that many of the companies around the world are thinking of the skills for the future. As a matter of fact, the old idea of human resources department has ended. Most of the global economy companies are thinking of global talents. And so they are competing for the best of talents. As a result of that, they care about how education systems are being designed. So number one thing is this partnership. Find them. There are many of them in technology, in manufacturing, in all sectors of the economy. Bring them to the table. And public-private partnership was one key thing that I did as a Minister of Education. I started with the Nigerian Stock Exchange, where the quoted companies, they needed to come to the table because designing the curriculum was designing curriculum for the skills that they would be using. So it was important that they should come to the table with their knowledge and with their money. And then the second thing in terms of resource is knowledge. We need to find all the research that has basically proven some interventions to work. One of the important things that Cynthia talked about, this matter of AI. Now, what we're discovering more and more is that AI is an incredible tool for positioning the teachers in the area of coaching and methods. And she also talked about access to textbooks for children in public schools. All of that is within the realm of how we organize the idea of public-private partnership and the role that scientific inquiry plays in this. Let me end finally on this note, Madam Moderator. I think that something that should give us plenty of hope for the year on education is that I have 3 game changers that will change our continent, whether we like it or not. You see, the African women, meaning the African girls and women, the African young people, and then technology. These 3 game changers will force and propel the kind of transformation and in the structure of the African economy and society. And so the world is really the oyster of the AU in this season. This coming of age, where the continent finally agreed to put education as top issue to be discussed. This is the best gift right now for all of us. Thank you.
Dr. Obi, thank you so much for your words there, and we really appreciate them. We're almost coming to an end, actually, of our session today, and I just wanted to thank once again Cynthia and Idris for their dynamic and important interventions on how we can transform education in Africa. So as we come to the end of this webinar, I think it's crucial to have one last word from our panelists in just 30 seconds on what you would like to leave our audience with today on how we advance in transforming the education sector in Africa. In 30 seconds, first I'll go to you, Minister Achul of South Sudan. What is your final message today?
My final message, we have enough legal framework. It's time to act.
Okay, that was less than 30 seconds, but thank you very much, Minister Achul. Let me go to you now, Minister Ba, your final, the last action, the actions we need towards transforming education in Africa.
I'm actually tempted to join Mr. Achul and actually agree with her. I think there's been a lot of studies, there's been a lot of assessments. I think I agree. I think we just need to get our hands together and do it. And actually, one of the things would actually mention, I think, and something the African Union is at a key place to facilitate is, I do think there's a need for more Pan-African collaboration, learning lessons, on addressing our challenges and supporting across board. So I think one thing I would leave us with is, how can we get more Pan-African collaboration?
So more Pan-African collaboration. Thank you, Minister Ba. And Dr. Obi, finally, your message to the audience as we leave.
We know the things that work. We know the things that work at scale to shift the learning experiences of our children. That's what they need. So we must just do it in the year of education and beyond that time. And the AUC is bringing all of us together so that our leaders, we have the political will, and our policymakers will see the salience in taking those evidence-proven interventions that change the learning experience and prepare our children for being the productive workforce of the world. It's worth doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Obi, for your message. And thank you to Minister Ba and Minister Achul as well, to our distinguished thought leaders today, for taking the time to discuss this immensely important issue with us. And we are, of course, delighted to have explored and gained knowledge and foresight on the groundbreaking solutions on education in the African context, including radical shifts and innovative solutions that are needed to make this a reality now. And now to close our webinar, once again, please welcome His Excellency Professor Mohamed Belhossein, the African Union Commissioner in charge of Education, Science and Technology.
Thank you for a very well managed webinar, and we are really on time. Fantastic. Congratulations, our moderator. I know last time in New York you did even better. Thank you very much. Well, I'm not going to go through whatever blah, blah, blah official speech, but I feel that this is a very promising kickoff of this series of webinars. It has been a very, very rich, dense discussion. If I may just quickly summarize some takeaways. Progress in Africa is progress for all the world. Not only 1 year to focus on education, but it should be an all-time priority. Making education a priority means having commensurate investment, policies, and legislative frameworks. And we need to act based on evidence-based elements. The transforming education should be based primarily on local budget. That's what we learned from our minister from South Sudan. We need to combine theoretical and practical teachings are asking us, our youth. We need to review curricula to reinforce STEM education, particularly for girls, but not only, to incorporate new disciplines like digital skills, like climate change. And also we talked about very important element, which is partnership. Of course, it is pointless to go to try to repair the roof if basic education, which is the foundation of education, is not corrected. Education, economic growth, and poverty are interrelated, and investing in universal coverage will procure 28% gain in GDP in low-income countries. This is a very strong statement that we could use for advocacy for this intended global fund, which should come as a complement to national efforts and national budget. We talked about partnership, and somebody insisted about Pan-African collaboration, which I cannot agree more. And finally, 2 points that I would like to add, because it seems to me that it is important, it's food for thought. One is governance, because governance is very important. It is also about accountability and transparency in the use of resources for education at country level, at regional level, at local level. Meaning, if we can also have a participatory process, particularly at local community level, there are experiences which show that when the communities are involved in the management of schools, the results are better, the rate of enrollment is higher, and the rate of dropouts is lower. So governance with participatory mechanisms to bring on board communities and to bring on board also students as legal, institutionalize the participation of students in school boards. With these few words, I would like to thank you all for a fantastic afternoon for us here in Addis Ababa. And I hope that the next webinars will be even richer than this one. And at the end, by the end of year 2024, we will have a fantastic document to share with all our partners, with member states, and with the international community about our discussions. Thank you very much.
Professor Beloucine, thank you for bringing us all together. I hope everyone found our discussion as rewarding and as informative as I did. Thank you to all of you who've joined us from around the world. And of course, as Professor Beloucine said, we look forward to the AU Year of Education next year. On behalf of the African Union Commission and UNICEF, I'm Foli Batibo. Thank you very much for joining us. Have an excellent day wherever you are.